The 2nd of April, Media Center Ukraine continues its work. I'm Svetlana Cheparenko. We will have a public discussion now about new challenges to resilience, forecasts, and management of future crises. We will have Victoriia Podhorna. She's an MP and deputy head of the Parliament Committee. Dmytro Zolotukhin, who is the advisor to the Minister of Culture and Strategic Communications. Dalia Bankauskaite, she is a leading specialist on strategic communications from Vilnius University. Dmytro Teperik, who is the international expert on the issues of security and Director General of the NGO Resilient Ukraine. Dmytro Zolotukhin about the concept of Dmytro Teperik about the concept of resilience. Hello, I'll be speaking English because I'm from Estonia, and our program of Resilient Ukraine started in 2015 as the Ukrainian-Estonian program, but to add some international aspects and to support my colleague from Lithuania.
Joining us, because we at the Resilient Ukraine are very much aware that the concept of resilience is evolving, it's changing under different factors and obviously under the certain maybe not so pleasant circumstances we are facing. So our task is actually to introduce public discussions in order to analyze Ukraine's experience in shaping resilience at different levels, being local, community or societal level, but also to instrumentalize and maybe even operationalize it for Ukraine's European friends. Of course, for the Baltic states, for other European countries who are ready to learn Ukrainian experience, as resilience, again, is a dynamic concept. So, as we know, it's emerged from psychology, from material sciences, but then it was introduced very quickly in policy world, and now basically I would say every policy document, every strategy mentions the word resilience without actually going into the depth and without actually knowing what is behind that term. But it's actually is very practical approach, and a lot of work has been done and is being done in Ukraine by Ukrainian intellectuals, academicians, and experts to put more essence in resilience. Our task again is to raise questions: what next? Because obviously, as a dynamic, practical concept, it is changing because the world is changing. So as we know, the world was a bit different, let's say 3 months ago than it's now, and what is for sure that it will be different in a year. So for us, of course, it is a challenge to think about resilience in practical terms, because government institutions would like, to capitalize it and to capture it as a static static structure, create some committee on resilience or some, I don't know, department of resilience, and then, draw some lines and some diagrams and something like that. But then, again, keyword of resilience is flexibility. And another keyword I would like to underline here, it's actually decision making. And that's, I'm very happy that we have here on the panel those who either prepare or make decisions or advise to make good and wise decisions at the government level, not just at the government level. Because I think decision making is one of the key functionalities for a resilient society. How to make decisions in a timely matter, in a quick matter during a crisis time is actually a very important skill. And basically how we develop these skills of decision making, and decision making again is a total process, is preparing decisions based on actual factual data, not just, let's say, on some political wishes or something like that, but yeah, preparing decisions, advising for making decisions, but then actually making decisions and then enforcing or implementing, executing the decision. So the whole process. It's a set of skills which is very important for a resilient society, especially during a crisis. And for that reason, of course, if we look at the future, it is not just intellectually, but I think practically interesting who will be making decisions in, let's say, 25 or 50 years. If we not delegate all decision-making to the artificial intelligence, I think we are not going to do that, because we are going to keep human in the loop. At least some decisions will be made by human beings. And then again, decision-making skills are very important, and then brings me to the next dimension, is actually younger generations. Are younger generations in Ukraine, in the Baltics, in other countries, are they adequately prepared for making decisions for the future? Are they aware about long-term consequences and the responsibilities that actually waiting for them in the future? Are they really equipped with the proper decision-making skills? Because again, it requires a bit broader imagination and kind of expanded thinking mindset than actual education system is now teaching. So the problem we witness, not just in Ukraine, but also, let's say, in the Baltics, that there's a declining habit of long-term planning. And it's not just, politicians who would like to plan short-term because they are just oriented for 1 or 2 days or maybe day after tomorrow, but other people too. Declining of long-term planning habit is actually very dangerous because then we, don't expand our thinking and imagination. And the reason for that is very simple. Is of course psychological or social psychological reasons of encapsulation, the consequences of war uncertainties, and also unpredictability of geopolitics, especially what comes now from the United States, but not only. And yeah, psychologically people just avoid making long-term planning and the habits disappear, which again make it more difficult for doing resilient resilient oriented work, because it requires kind of expanded mindset. So I will stop here now because I know that colleagues will have more to add, but obviously I will take comments and questions. Yeah. Дякую.
Дякую, пане Дмитре. За останні 3 роки
Thank you, Dmytro. I think that over the last 3 years, Ukrainians have shown the unbelievable level of resilience. My next question goes to Victoriia. Dear Victoriia, could you please tell us about state approaches that help us retain resilience and successfully implement some plans? What are the skills and experience that Ukrainians have got, and what they are getting from the state in order to prepare for future crises? Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for invitation. This is very interesting was to hear from my Estonian colleague. We are working with Estonia, and some also is a co-chair together with Alexei Zvorenetsky of the interfactional association called Strategic Decisions for Ukraine. We've been working for 4 years now. We have close cooperation with our partners from the EU, and the idea has emerged even before the war, because we understood that in Ukraine the long-term planning is not very well developed. We used to have some public documents which were very inefficient. The strategies were written, but they were not implemented. We started to try to understand what is in the way, and we saw that apart from the traditional strategic planning, we have convergence approach. This is a traditional method, but there's also divergent thinking, which provides for the variations of thought. And we understood that this divergence thinking is a foresight that is being used broadly by our partners in the European Union, also in Australia, in the US. I can tell you that we are now part of the network of organizations that joins together representatives of political power. It's called Future Pioneering. 110 countries take part. This is a very widespread practice, and they are actually engaged in planning the future. So we have to think not only about governance and politics, but much broader, because this is very important for planning in order to provide for the resilience of the states. So there's a focus for the future, and this also has theoretical foundation, forward future thinking, oriented for the future in order to develop strategies and develop long-term planning. And the thinking about the future should be formed that allows to form the view of how the events will develop under different scenarios. And this enables you to react to different challenges and solve the goals that you set to reach. This is a very important approach which is really widely used, and there are very clear institutional formats that some states use to promote their approach. I think that Finland is the most advanced country in this. This is a small country which gained huge, very good results in developing the countries. They have built an institutional model which exists on the level of this government and on the level of parliamentary committees, and they are developing their policy based on the foresights that show different scenarios, and they are gaining different best options for the future based on which they set the goals and then they implement them. And they understand the entire continuum of coordinates, and they choose the best solution out of there. They've been engaged in this since 1987. They are leaders in the world, so we are studying their experience. We've been to Finland. We got acquainted with the work of the Committee on the Future, and we also have a plan to set up a Committee on Future in the Ukrainian Parliament. I think this is a very important step. Even before our convocation, there were champions for the future, MPs who tried to promote this topic. So we started to continue this work. Besides, we've done something that the Ukrainian Parliament has never done. even the government had not done this on the systemic level. We're doing real foresights, continuing for a year or more, and within the conditions of this cruel war that we are in, we have made a foresight Ukraine 2040 together with the British Parliament and also with Cambridge and Oxford universities. We can give you a link. It's published in English on the site of the British Parliament. Regrettably, the Ukrainian Parliament has not published it in Ukrainian. Besides, we set up a special chatbot. This is a community of ordinary citizens who can explain their views. We had a community of more than 800 people. They are taking part in this or that way in our research. At the moment, we're completing the research on the future of Russia. We do not want to only do the analysis for the current situation, but we have to understand how Russia will influence the world in the future. I think that in May we will be able to present this research. We're grateful to Renaissance Foundation for supporting us. 400 people took part in this research who expressed their views on the future of Russia. We also plan to create a foresight supported by the Abbott Foundation on the very important issue for Ukraine, which is the issue of migration. We're now setting up a framework in order to do this, so we are engaged in some political and practical things, introducing the methodology of foresight into the work of the Ukrainian Parliament. And we also have made the first steps to institutionalize this work. This is not just the foresight, this is also early warning or averting institutions. We are discussing this at the level of the government. We have a research unit at the Parliament, which is called Foresight Department. They are monitoring different trends, and we are talking to our cabinet of ministers, and first of all with the Ministry of Economy, who, in order to create the department attached to the Secretariat of the Cabinet of Ministers, so that this institution works together with the research service of the Parliament. We see the experience not only of Finland, but in other countries as well. In their parliaments, I met them. First of all, this concerns the departments of strategic foresights in different parliaments of the world. And I think that before our convocation ends, we will be able to create the legal framework to create such institutions, and we want to introduce, and our experts are working on this. They will form the document which is called the Assessment of Influences and Risks for Future Generations, because we want the key draft laws adopted by the Parliament have the assessment of how they influence future generations, because this is very important in conditions of such uncertainty and crisis that Ukraine is going through now. It is very important for us that this legislation serves not only us, but also our grand and great-grandchildren. This is a very principled issue for us, because this is a guarantee of the future existence of Ukraine and future success of Ukraine, not only compared to how we are during the war, but before the war as well. So this is very concise story of our plans. We also interact with our international partners on security NATO's future, Ukraine's place in NATO. We're now starting to make another research with our British partners, and I can tell you that this sector is developing bit by bit in Ukraine, and our main next step will be involving NGOs and the network, create the network of NGOs who are willing to promote and develop this topic. When we present our next foresight, we are going to make the presentation as broad as possible because we want to involve the organizations that are capable of future thinking. They can build the warning and averting approaches so that this is maximally useful for the country. Thank you, Victoria. I would like to continue the talk about European experience.
In your opinion, what threats to democratic European government could shape a future crisis for European countries?
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. At first, now we talk a lot about societal resilience, but mainly about society, people. Prior to that, there was another quite popular word, strategic communication. When coming to this meeting, I was thinking, okay, how those two concepts are interlinked, and what role strategic communication, especially at the state level, plays for building societal resilience. If we talk about relying on Lithuanian experience, I would say that strategic communication key features I would name, like, first of all, communication as such is a facilitator. Facilitator for reaching certain goals. You have to inform. And especially in a democratic regime, it obliges you to tell beforehand about provide adequate information to prepare stakeholders, prepare society. Then we lead then to another concept of crisis management. You have to know, you have to communicate, to be in touch with the society. Strategic communication, another feature is openness, because then you have really to openness and accountability. You have to inform in advance, and also to show that it is your government is accountable to people. And all put together, I would say it leads to inclusive governance. When state institutions, be it politicians or civil servants, decision making, and the society work together. And this gap between the state and the society is as shallow as possible. We have different experience. We come from the Baltics. We really, during all that process of more than 30 years of independence, when our countries re-established independence, we were building this inclusive governance tradition, pattern. And when really talking about societal resilience, we also very much measure and monitor inclusive governance, not only open governance, but inclusive governance. All these seems like concepts, but they are very translatable, very tangible in daily life. With Dmitri, we ran for the third year, we ran the surveys on the Baltic states on societal resilience, how our society, how our people navigate, perceive the situation, and we try to predict their motivation of acting in different situations, usually critical situations. We monitor closely experience of Ukrainians. And what I see in Lithuanian case that the last 3 years really shows the increase of trust into civil society, into NGO sector, which is, I would say, extremely, it's a decisive moment for building societal resilience as such. So, like putting two terms together, strategic communication and societal resilience, as I would say successful strategic communication ensures good results, building up societal resilience. Absolutely agree with Dmitri saying that this is a social phenomena and it is not, and it's a moving process. So you never know how you would act in principle, but you have to address so many factors to be at least fit for capable for making long-term solutions or mid-term solutions. Now, when Madame Victoriia was saying about foresight, with Dmitri again from the Baltics, we did pilot research of 3 Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, about future of our countries. This is about youth. We talk in the perspective how our countries, how our young generation, those in 1825, project themselves in 10 years' time, 12 years' time. So again, we have the different, because our societies are multifaceted, multi-layer, and youth as well. And they have this privilege to be part of the European Union of Europe. So how much they feel owners of their states, members of their states. And this is where we come again with the inclusive governance. And there are very concrete measures that are done not only on paper, how that inclusivity is ensured and cooperation, but it's really how it is reflected in how our young people perceive their future. Are they happy in our countries, or they think that this is the term, that they have to stay within their parents and then they venture into the world? Lithuania drafted, as every country, taking the examples and methodology from Nordic countries, Finland, Sweden, even Singapore and other best examples, also did do the projections. Lithuania 2030, Lithuania 2050, and this is exactly where you have also a process when you include so many people and different sectors, interest groups, to project scenarios from the most optimistic down to the black, to the dark scenario. And again, you have the questions, what we should do, and what should be done next in order to have this most optimistic scenario. And we come back to the square one, inclusive governance. This difference, this gap between the state institutions, political level, and society should be as shallow as possible. We talk about trust and working together. It's about ownership. Of course, I assume that this is about democratic societies that I am talking. And the last point, I would like to say that here I have a privilege, that means in Ukraine, in Kiev, I have a privilege to work as a senior expert with the program, Ukraine to EU program that being launched yesterday. We are functional as a program since January, and the program is co-financed by European Union, by Lithuania, Denmark, and Sweden. Meant to facilitate, to provide support to the state institutions leading in Ukraine's EU accession, supporting EU accession and EU membership. This is also about foresight, about future building, and about strategic communication. Consisting of 4 components, I'm responsible for the component called communication, but communication is a multifaceted. It's a lot of inclusive exercise, I would say. And another component extremely important that work with my component is civic society, civil society, NGO sector. So that's where I would stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Dalia. Пане Дмитре, пані Dalia
Dmytro, Dalia has spoken extensively on the role and the place of strategic communication. So what's happening in the Ministry of Culture and Strategic Communications in Ukraine? What plans are there? Thank you for having me here. Thank you, Dmytro, for involving me in this. I'm admiring your optimism. For so many years, you've been involved in the issue of resilience in this country, and I also admire the optimism of my colleagues on the panel. However, I would try to express my own stance, not the politics, not the point of view of the ministry. I'm here as a private person which has relation to the ministry. Of course, in practical dimension, the Ministry of Culture and Strategic Communications is an object of state structure of Ukraine, which implements the address of Ukraine's president and commander-in-chief to the parliament, which had an unofficial title, the Plan of Resilience for Ukraine, under the conditions of change of the political agenda in the US and the entire world. Of course, quite a lot of turbulence was forecast for this year, and we still are within this turbulence, but as far as I personally am concerned, I don't have a luxury to look forward, to look 2 or 10 years forward. I don't know what's going to happen the next week, but this motivates me to think even more about the category of resilience and about the phenomena that we face of late. I think that it is very important and logical to develop the category of resilience and thinking in Ukraine, because we can say that Ukraine is the most resilient country, state of the world. And it's been proven this not only over the last 3 years or over the last 10 years, when the Russian aggression against Ukraine was in place, but also over several hundreds of years, because the entire philosophy of the Russian Empire is that Ukraine as a state should not exist. In spite of the discussion that's going on in the international press or international sphere arena in general, the war between Russia and Ukraine will not end soon, because there's no place for the Russian Empire, which may be called Russian Federation, simultaneously with the independent state of Ukraine. This is physically impossible, and before this is solved, which means that either Russian Empire or Ukraine goes away, this war will continue, because it was not stopped in 2014, 2015, not in 2025, in spite of ceasefires or truces that may be made. The war will continue. It will become even more cruel. It will involve into its orbit NATO member states, EU member states, and then we will see to which extent our Western partners are resilient, because we are aware of the resilience of Ukraine now already. The phenomenon of Ukraine's resilience is also in the fact that, according to the research surveys of the Kyiv International Sociology Institute have the trend to be mostly not very highly trusted by Ukrainians. For several hundred years now, Ukrainians been hating the state institutions. One of the reasons being that before 1917 and then before 1991, when Ukraine got independent, most or almost or even all the state institutions were aimed at destroying Ukraine, like the cultural identity, the language, and so on. During the World War I, Ukrainians were involved in the carnage by the Russian Empire, then the revolution, the Soviet Union, World War II, and the Soviet experience as the endless experience of violence and enmity, animosity of state institutions towards Ukrainians. So it is quite well understood why Ukrainians hate their state institutions. But how they can, while hating their institutions, contain the aggression of the much bigger country against Ukraine's state, this is a big surprise for us, a big unknown. Most of the people whom I talk to say that good Lord loves you and he or she makes wonders for you. Still, we have to understand how, in spite of the approach and intentions of the Russian Empire formed by different people who worked with Sergei Kiriyenko when he was head of Rosatom, they are filling the Russian Federation and the retinue of Mr. Putin. They all say that Ukraine as an independent actor should not exist. Yes, you can talk to us about ceasefire, but still you should not exist at all. Another aspect that I would like to single out is the approach to resilience as a category. We talked a lot about definitions with colleagues. Sometimes I talk to my wife about this, how resistance, the capacity to resist, is different from resilience. She is a chemistry expert by her education, and we are discussing whether Ukrainians are resistant or resilient. For me, a rather serious dilemma is to practically implement our ability to be resilient. We hope that truce or ceasefire, all-embracing ceasefire, is achieved. It is evident that both the US and Russian Federation will pressurize Ukraine's political leadership in order to make us hold presidential elections. The concept of resilience says that the subject has to be flexible and adapt itself to different conditions. But the Constitution of Ukraine says that during martial law, it is impossible to hold elections. So in order to remain resilient under the blows of the Russian aggression, we should fix something in legislation and not hold elections. I think that such a design is not accidental. The idea was to fix this order and not change it. But the war is not going to stop. It will continue. And it is evident that there will be demands for us to remove martial law and hold the elections. So the open question for me is whether the change of political agenda for the country in war, is it resilient or non-resilient? Our discussion in theory is very cool. However, it is good that Ukraine is the most resilient country in the world. However, regrettably, I think that the next resilient country in the world is Russia. In spite of its artificialness and in spite of the loss of 1 million of their people during the 3 years of this stage of war, also a great number of people there lost their jobs. It is not understood what the situation is with the financial stabilization funds. The great amount of sanctions, the great amount of damage to their trade, they still continue to spend money to kill Ukrainians. If this is not the next resilient country, then which is? China has never faced such conditions of their existence. So let's look at the practical significance of resilience. Let's take this specific case. We're talking about adaptiveness and our relation to uncertainty. Define resilience as a category, then democratic elections in a country at war. Does this bring us closer to resilience or actually moves us away from resilience? We see that the election campaign is near. We see some signs of this in our regions. I think that this actually threatens with internal collapse for us. When the political agenda removes everything except political agenda, same as it happened in the US when in our information landscape, the discussion about the US and their internal changes has actually pushed out any discussion about Russia. So this is interesting for me. As far as for the resilience plan that was mentioned here, it is distributed between ministries. All the 10 directions or chapters which Mr. Zelensky mentioned in his address are assigned to different departments, and respectively the Ministry of Culture and Strategic Communications does what it is assigned with. I think that you moved us closer to real discussion. I would like to hear comments from your colleagues about elections, about whether it is possible or difficult in Ukraine to plan something for the long-term future, and whether we should borrow European experience or Europeans should borrow our experience. And I think that 3 years ago it became clear that the Western world was not prepared to the war in the European continent.
Give floor to Pani Victoria. Well, first of all, I think in this room and at every discussion we should say like Europe including Ukraine. I mean, not Europe separately and Ukraine separately. We are in the same boat. Absolutely. We have been, and especially after late January, I think we are on the same boat, and that's full stop. So therefore, of course, we can learn from each other. I mean, Ukraine can learn something from the Baltics, Baltics can learn something from Ukraine, and Germans, and so on and so forth. So we are on the same boat, and for that reason, I think, speaking about future foresight, what kind of future version we can imagine for Russia, as Pan Dmytro said, that it's actually unnatural formation. it's important that we in Europe, again including Ukraine, we in Europe agree what kind of Russia we would like to have in the future. What is, let's say, acceptable version of Russia, acceptable for Europe, that we could tolerate? I'm not speaking, let's say, about having good relations, but at least tolerate, maybe deter, maybe something else. But what kind of version of Russia we would like to have, because that is a factor which will shape Europe's future, not just Ukraine's or Baltics, or I mean Europe's future in general. So of course then we look for the foresight study to be presented by Ukrainian Parliament in May, because that I think will give us at least some scenarios. But I really like what Dmytro said on the practical level. So then what next? So we can imagine, let's say, there will be some force against Ukraine to have elections, and then how to assess it. Is it, let's say, symbol of being resilient or not? And I totally agree that actually we don't have to put resilience in every policy document. I think we have gone a little too much with that concept. I mean, it's good in its own place and its own time, and therefore it is again a good opportunity to not just to study resilience in Ukraine, but also to look where it could be implemented and in which context.
Дякую. Пані Вікторія, прошу. Пані Вікторія, ваш коментар. Я так розумію, ви хотіли ще...
Your comment, Victoria. I think that you wanted to add something. Do you hear us? Yes, you... Look, this discussion says that we're thinking in terms of 5, 10, or 15 years. Maybe this is not practical, you say. I would tell you that if you look at our research on Ukraine, we are repeating something that was actually done in 2023, early in 2023. And regrettably, this foresight was not implemented in the activity of the key institutions of our authorities. They do not see the key risks that are there. The foresight is not only about predicting risks, it's about building a better future and about how to influence the current policy. When we develop a foresight, we get the map of risks, and that's why we can adapt politics and react to risks. Regrettably, well, we went to different institutions of authority. We were forecasting the terror against our energy system, and that it will influence greatly our capacity. We went to Ukrenergo, we went to the National Security and Defense Council. They've seen it all, but there's no mechanism how these foresights can influence and should influence the working out of policies. Now, when we are developing the foresight on Russia, and we are almost through with this, our team was composed of 46 volunteers, and we were studying not only Russian sources, but also Chinese, Portugal, Brazilian sources, more than 200 signals, more than 35 researchers that we studied, including Russian demographics. I must say that the forecast is not, the scenarios are not very optimistic as far as Russia is concerned, but that's an unprecedented level of Russia's fragility. we have noticed, we have the table of statistics, we see that most of stories are especially doctored for publication. And in reality, the situation is worse than they declare. And you only have to compare some research and statistics in order to understand what is going on in Russia. In reality, it is much worse than the Russians admit. Even liberals, their assessment is not truthful. The situation in Russia is worse than they say, and this can explode any moment. So far, the scenarios does not show any rapid changes, but one scenario says that there may be a very quick downfall. And the basis for this research is the study of economic trends in Russia. As far as the elections are concerned, I would ask Dmytro and ask him about the resilience of Ukrainian society, but I think that one of the components of our resilience is that we have a very long-standing democratic culture from beneath. I saw this even when I was a political scientist. This is a long-standing tradition taking its roots in Kiev Rus. And this democratic resilience, what do you think? Can it be broken? Can it be broken and destroyed by the elections? I do not think that it's going to have such a destructory nature. There are declarations that the candidates may sign to understand that the elections are within the context of ceasefire, so that there is no such campaign that ruins Ukraine. I think that everyone is aware of this and everyone is aware of their responsibilities. I'm not sure that even Russia's influence can have such a destructory character. I see that some traditional things on the level of rhetorics do happen, but most of political forces are aware of the need to preserve the resilience of Ukraine. Dmitri, do you want to answer? Yes, thank you very much. I want to emphasize that the main risks and threats are not emanating from the process of elections itself, and I do agree that the issue of free will and self-organization of the population, multiplied by the fact that the army and the volunteers, according to sociological surveys, are at the top of people's trust. This all is true, but the major danger and threat and risk are the people who are going to take part in this election process, plus the people who are not going to take part in this process, because not a single person from the list that our Western partners told that you should actually show democracy, they have not explained to us how we exclude military personnel from the election process. Let them explain how they will participate as media persons, as actors, how they will exclude from what's going to be discussed the things that happened in 2022-2025. Look at the latest article in New York Times about the analysis of the involvement of Americans in the war. We cannot analyze and predict how these people will behave, whether they will retain a certain level of ethics in their activities. So I think this is a source of very high uncertainty in their behavior, which can transform into internal media and not only media conflicts. And these conflicts will, of course, increase the influence of Russia.
Would you like to add something to our discussion?
First of all, I really appreciate this exchange, and it's very educational to me, and I thought, should I step in? I'm aware I have questions about the very concrete situation, but in my capacity, I would really think about, we talk about, again, resilience, and we use that word in a very broad way. Societal resilience, it's not only about being adaptive, because adaptive, it's already reaction, but it's really willingness of a human being, of a group or a society to act. And what are the factors allowing people to act in one or another way, or willing to act? So there are so many, and this is where foresight comes in, and there are many layers, and again we can talk about, then we have to structure much better the analysis. If we talk about individual level, not going into election topic, but we have to, when we look at Ukrainian and Baltic societies, we talk about hope, about morale, about the mood of people, what makes them be more optimistic, believing in future and adequately working. Also, we address the issue of inclusivity, how much human beings, members of the society, feel part of the society. For example, in Lithuania, the major concern of the social cohesion is that society is divided. There's huge division, one or another, not based on social, even not social income, and but more about on the emotional level, whether they are listened to, whether they are heard by certain political decisions, by policies adopted. So this polarization is more emotional based than I would say socially based, or socially based, yeah, the social security based. So these are the issues when we talk and project our future that could be translated into a very concrete sectorial decisions. But as I said, I'm a little bit, I think, driving apart from the discussion that is now just started.
Thank you. У нас є час для одного запитання.
We have time for just one question from the floor. If you have such a question, please raise your hand. Well, no questions. Thank you, our speakers, for this conversation, which actually turned into a discussion. We were talking about new challenges to resilience, and the Media Center Ukraine will continue its work tomorrow. Please follow our announcements. Thank you for being with us.